It rolled down from the high ridges carrying dust-dry pine scent, and the sound of distant emptiness that only the Old West knew how to make. It was the kind of wind that stripped hope from travelers and tested the will of anyone foolish enough to cross the mountains alone. Morning light crept over the jagged cliffs of the frontier, slow and pale, revealing a land carved by hardship, stone faces, scarred by time, narrow trails clinging to death itself, and deep canyons that swallowed sound and soul alike. This was not a land that forgave mistakes, it remembered them. She rode carefully along the mountain path, her horse tired, her supplies thin, and her eyes fixed forward. The trail was narrow enough to make a prayer feel necessary and wide enough only for courage or desperation. No towns lay ahead, only rumor said there was a crossing. Beyond the ridge, a place where the land softened and survival came easier. But rumors were all people had out here, and many had died chasing them. Her past weighed heavier than her saddle. The loss of family, the silence of nights without voices, the long miles traveled with grief as her only companion, had hardened her, yet something fragile still lived in her chest, a quiet refusal to lie down and disappear like so many others. This journey was not about hope anymore. It was about proving she still belonged among the living. Far above her, on the higher ridge, a man stood watching the land like he had done for years. His coat was worn, his boots cracked, and his face marked by time and regret. He was the kind of man folks spoke about in half sentences, the one who lived alone and answered to no one. The mountains had become his shelter and his sentence, both chosen and deserved in his own mind. He had learned long ago that getting involved only brought pain. The West taught him that lesson harshly. Every scar on his hands carried a memory of choosing wrong, trusting too much, or arriving too late, so he stayed apart, watching life from a distance, letting it pass like weather over stone. When he noticed the rider below, he did not move at first. Travelers came and went, most never knowing how close death walked beside them. The trail she followed was known for sudden breaks, hidden rot, and cruel turns. The mountain did not care who crossed it, man, woman, young or old. The moment came without warning. A sharp crack split the morning air. The ground beneath her horse shifted, giving way, as if the earth itself had decided her time was due. The horse screamed, pulling back while she was thrown forward, rope and pack tangling around her body. The world tilted, sky traded places with stone, and in one violent breath she was no longer riding but falling. The rope caught her halfway, biting into her waist and arms, stopping her descent just long enough to let terror bloom beneath her ribs. She hung there, suspended between the sky above and the endless dark below, the canyon stretching open like a grave waiting patiently. Her fingers clawed at the rope, instinct fighting panic. The horse scrambled backward, free at last, leaving her hanging alone, the supplies falling past her, vanishing into nothing. The silence after the chaos was worse than the fall, broken only by the groan of rope fibers straining against her weight. High above, the man stepped forward. Before he realized he had moved, his breath caught as he saw her hanging there, the rope frayed, the cliff edge crumbling beneath what little held her. The distance between them was not far, yet the danger made it feel impossible. He knelt, testing the ground, feeling how loose the stone was. He knew this ridge too well. One wrong step would send him sliding after her. The mountain would claim them both and never remember their names. She looked up then, her face pale, eyes wide, not screaming, not begging, just staring, as if trying to understand whether the figure above was real or another cruel trick of the West. Her strength was already failing, the rope cutting deeper with every breath. Their eyes met across the distance, and something shifted in the man, something he had buried under years of solitude and silence. He saw not just a woman in danger, but every moment he had turned away, every chance he had let slip because fear felt safer than loss. The wind rose again, stronger, now whipping his coat, snapping the rope, making the canyon breathe beneath them. Dust stung his eyes, and for a moment the past and present blurred together. He remembered another time, another voice calling for help, and the choice he had made to walk away this time. The mountain waited, it offered him the same test again. He did not speak. There were no words that could reach her through the wind and distance. Instead, he moved slowly, deliberately lowering himself toward the edge, using every lesson the West had taught him. Survival demanded patience, courage demanded more. Each step sent pebbles tumbling into the abyss. She flinched every time, afraid the next sound would be the rope giving way. Her arms burned, her vision dimmed, and still she held on because giving up meant choosing the dark. As he neared the edge, he saw how little time remained. The rope fibers were splitting one by one like hours running out. There would be no second attempt, no backup plan, only a single decision made in the space between heartbeats. The man paused just long enough to anchor himself to a jagged outcrop, his hands steady. Despite the danger, he lay flat, spreading his weight, pressing himself against the earth that had been both enemy and home for so long below him. She slipped an inch, then another. The rope screamed under the strain, and her grip faltered. A gasp tore from her throat, raw and terrified, echoing up the canyon. That sound shattered whatever hesitation remained in him. He reached down, stretching farther than safety allowed, fingers scraping stone, reaching for life rather than hiding from it. The mountain seemed to hold its breath as he leaned over the edge, the world narrowing to the space between his hand and hers. This was the arrival of everything he had avoided, the moment that would decide whether he remained a ghost in the hills or became part of a story worth carrying forward. And as the rope gave another sharp cry and the wind howled louder than ever, the Old West watched silently, ready to remember what choice he would make. The moment stretched thin like a wire pulled too tight. The wind roared through the canyon as if the land itself argued against mercy. The rope twisted and groaned, biting deeper into flesh and bone, while the woman clung with what little strength remained. Her arms shook, not from fear alone, but from the slow creeping certainty that the mountain always won. The man felt the pull of gravity fighting him every inch forward. His boots scraped loose stone, his fingers bled as they clawed for a better grip. He could feel the earth trembling beneath him, not an earthquake, but the quiet warning of rock ready to break free. At this height there were no heroes, only consequences. He locked his jaw and leaned farther over the edge, stretching his body beyond reason, beyond safety. His shoulder screamed in protest and memories surged, uninvited, the sound of another wind, another canyon. Another choice he had once failed to make. His breath came hard, but his eyes never left hers. She watched him with a strange calm settling over her face, not acceptance but focus. The West had taught her that panic wasted strength. She shifted her weight, inch by inch, ignoring the fire tearing through her muscles. Every movement felt like dragging a lifetime behind her. Their fingers brushed once, barely enough to feel, then slipped apart. The brief contact sent a shock through them, both proof that this moment was real, that they still existed beyond fear. Below them, the canyon waited, patient, endless, swallowing. The sound of falling stones that broke free with each movement. The shadows beneath looked thick enough to drown in. The man adjusted his position, digging his elbow into a crack in the rock. Anchoring himself deeper, he tore a strip from his coat, wrapping it around his wrist, and a jagged stone, tying himself not to safety but to chance. It was the kind of knot men made when they knew there would be no second try. She felt the rope slide again, burning her palms raw. Blood darkened the fibers and dripped downward, vanishing before it ever reached the bottom. Her breath came in short, sharp pulls, each one weaker than the last. She thought of the miles behind her, faces lost to time, graves left unmarked, and nights spent staring at stars, wondering why she kept moving forward. Maybe this was the answer, not an ending, but a moment that demanded everything she had left. The rope jerked, suddenly snapping a strand loud enough to echo across the canyon. Her body dropped a handspan before stopping again. A cry escaped her before she could stop it, torn from deep within where survival lived. That sound ripped through the man like a bullet. He lunged forward, abandoning caution, stretching until his ribs pressed against stone. His fingers closed around her wrist, at last solid, desperate, real. For a heartbeat, neither moved, afraid the smallest shift would undo them. Both breathed together, harsh, uneven breaths shared across the void. The mountain answered with a warning. A section of the cliff crumbled beneath his boots, sending stone cascading down the rope. Screamed again, and her body swung violently, slamming against the rock. She cried out, pain flashing across her face. He tightened his grip, ignoring the agony tearing through his arm. His muscles strained beyond what they had known in years. The weight of her life pulled at him heavier than any burden he had ever carried. Slowly, carefully, he began to pull inch by inch. Every movement demanded calculation, patience, strength. He spoke then, his voice rough, torn by the wind, but steady. Hold on, he said, not a promise, but a command. She obeyed because there was nothing else left to do. Her fingers locked around his forearm, nails digging in. She could feel his strength faltering and forced herself to help, kicking against the rock, using the last of her fading power. The rope gave another sharp protest, then snapped clean. For a split instant they fell together, the world spinning, weightless, silent. The man roared, driving his elbow deeper into the crack, tearing skin, but stopping their descent with a violent jolt that stole the breath from them both. They hung there, locked together, hearts hammering against ribs, lungs burning. The canyon raged beneath, but they remained suspended between life and death, held by nothing but flesh will in a mountain that had not yet decided. The man wasted no time. He shifted his grip, hauling her upward, using his legs, his back, his teeth clenched so hard his jaw ached. Each inch gained felt like a victory wrestled from fate. She gasped as her body cleared the edge, collapsing against him, both of them sprawled on the narrow ledge, trembling, broken alive. For a long moment neither spoke. The wind rushed past, carrying dust and the smell of stone and sweat. The mountain watched, unmoved. Her body shook uncontrollably as the pain caught up with her bruises, cuts, and the deep ache of survival. She pressed her forehead to the ground, breathing in dirt like it was air itself. The man lay beside her, staring up at the sky, its blue impossibly wide after the darkness below. His chest heaved and his arm burned from shoulder to wrist, but he welcomed the pain. It meant he was still here. Eventually she turned her head, looking at him properly for the first time. His face was lined, weathered eyes, tired but alive. She searched for words and found none. He sat up slowly, tearing another strip from his coat, wrapping her bleeding hands with careful practice movements. His touch was firm, gentle, learned from a life of patching wounds in places. Far from help. You should not have been on that trail, he said finally. She gave a weak laugh that ended in a cough. The West does not ask permission, she replied, something like a smile tugged at his mouth, brief and unfamiliar. As the sun climbed higher, they rested there, listening to the land around them. The mountain seemed unchanged, indifferent to the struggle that had unfolded upon its edge. But both of them knew something had shifted. The West had demanded a choice, and for once it had not been refused. When they finally stood legs unsteady and began moving away from the cliff, the canyon fell silent behind them, keeping its secrets. The trail ahead remained uncertain, harsh, and unforgiving, yet neither walked alone anymore. And somewhere deep within the wild old West, a story had begun to take shape, carried not by glory or legend, but by two lives that refused to let go when the mountain tried to claim them. They moved slowly along the narrow trail, leaving the broken ledge behind, as if turning their backs on a memory too sharp to hold. The woman leaned heavily on a branch he had shaped into a walking staff. With his knife, each step sent pain through her legs and ribs, yet she welcomed it, because pain meant breath and breath meant life. The mountain stretched wide and indifferent around them. Its slopes rolled like frozen waves, and the wind whispered through dry grass, carrying stories older than either of them. The sun climbed higher, turning stone warm beneath their hands, but the chill of the canyon still clung to their bones. Neither spoke for a long while. Words felt fragile and unnecessary out here. The land understood silence better than speech. He kept a careful distance, close enough to catch her if she stumbled, yet far enough to respect the space grief demanded. At last, the trail widened just enough to allow them to stop. He crouched beside a cluster of rocks, unpacking what little he carried: dried meat, a canteen, a length of twine. The woman sank down, grateful for rest, her breath steadying, though her body trembled from exhaustion. She studied him while he worked the lines of his face, the way his hands moved. Sure, in practice, this was not a man who acted without thought. He had survived long enough to learn restraint, and yet had risked everything for a stranger. "Why did you come back?" she asked, her voice low, almost lost to the wind. He paused, fingers still wrapped around the canteen. The question had weight, and he did not answer quickly. "Because I was there," he said finally, "and because leaving would have followed me longer than staying." She nodded, accepting that truth. Out here, choices carved themselves into a person deeper than any knife. They shared the water sparingly, then ate in silence, watching shadows creep along the slopes. Below them the canyon lay hidden now, out of sight but never out of mind. When they rose again, the path led downward toward a stretch of timber and scrub where the land softened just enough to offer shelter. As they walked, she noticed the way he scanned the ground, reading signs she could not see: broken twigs, disturbed dust, the faint mark of hooves. "You live out here," she said. He answered without pride or shame, "I belong to it." As afternoon wore on, clouds gathered heavy and gray. The wind shifted, carrying the smell of rain and the promise of cold. Nightfall, they needed shelter, and both knew it. They reached a shallow ravine lined with juniper and rock overhangs. He led her beneath one where the ground sloped just enough to drain water away. He worked quickly, building a small fire ring from stone, gathering dry brush sheltered from the wind. As flame caught and grew, the woman felt warmth seep back into her fingers. Her hands throbbed where rope had burned skin raw. She hissed softly as he cleaned the wounds with water, then wrapped them again, tighter this time. "You have done this before," she said. He did not look up too many times. The fire crackled, sending sparks into the dimming sky. The rain began as a soft patter, then steadied into a curtain that blurred the world beyond there. Shelter, the sound filled the ravine, steady, relentless, almost comforting. They sat close now, sharing heat, listening to the storm. He fed the fire, carefully guarding it from the wind. The light danced across his face, softening it, revealing something younger beneath the scars. She felt the weight of the day settle into her bones, the terror of the fall, the moment suspended between everything and nothing at all returned. Now that survival no longer demanded every thought. I thought I was already dead, she said quietly while I was hanging there. Thought this is how it ends, not with a gun or sickness, just the earth, deciding I was done. He stared into the fire, watching embers glow and fade. The earth decides many things, he said, but not all. She turned to him, meeting his gaze. For the first time she saw uncertainty there mixed with something else, hope perhaps, or fear of it. Night fell fully. Then the sky hidden by cloud, the rain slowed, then stopped, leaving the world washed and silent. They ate again sparingly and lay back against stone, letting the fire burn low. Sleep came uneven, broken by dreams. The woman jerked awake, once heart racing, hands clutching at air. He was already awake, sitting upright, watching the darkness, listening. Just the wind, he said. Before she spoke, she nodded, ashamed of the fear that lingered, but grateful for his presence. The firelight flickered, casting long shadows that stretched and merged with the night. Sometime before dawn the clouds broke, stars spilled across the sky, bright and cold. The woman stared at them, breath catching. She had not looked up like this in a long time, not since before loss taught her to keep her eyes down. In the pale light she saw him watching the horizon, alert. Even in stillness, you saved me, she said softly. He shook his head. I chose not to walk away. That feels like the same thing, she replied. He did not argue. At first light they moved again. The storm had washed the trail clean, making travel easier, though the ground was slick. The forest thickened, offering cover. From the wind birdsong crept back, tentative at first, then bolder. As they walked, she spoke of where she had come from, a homestead burned by men who took what they wanted and left nothing behind. A husband buried beneath a cottonwood, children sent east to kin because the frontier had grown too cruel for small lives. I could not stay, she said, and I could not go back. He listened without interruption. When she finished, he said, only the land breaks many people. That does not make them weak. They reached a ridge overlooking a distant valley. Smoke curled upward, faint but real. A settlement, perhaps, or a lone cabin. Her steps slowed, uncertainty pulling at her chest. Civilization meant safety, but also memory, judgment, questions she was not ready to answer. He noticed her hesitation. The valley is a day's walk from here, he said. There are people, supplies, and you, she asked. He followed her gaze down the slope, then back to the wild behind them. I will go where I always have. The thought settled heavy between them. The fire, the rescue, the long night shared it all led to this crossing. She stopped, turning fully toward him. You do not have to, he said quickly. Misreading her silence, I am no company for towns. I know, she said, but I do not want to walk the rest alone. The admission surprised them both. She saw it in his eyes, the way hope flickered, then retreated, afraid to be seen. He looked out across the land, weighing a lifetime of solitude against a future unknown. The mountain watched again, silent, waiting. At last he exhaled, slow and deep. I can walk with you as far as the valley, he said. Beyond that we will see. She smiled, not wide, not bright, but real, and that was enough. They turned together toward the valley, footsteps falling in rough unison, leaving the high wild places behind. For now the canyon lay far back, hidden by distance and stone, but its mark remained carried within them. The Old West did not grant easy endings. It offered only roads and the courage to choose them, and as they descended into the widening world ahead, two lives moved forward, bound not by fate alone, but by a moment when neither let go. The descent into the valley took longer than either expected, not because the trail was difficult, but because the land seemed to resist. Then with memory the air grew heavier as they moved lower, carrying the smell of damp earth, smoke, and old sorrow. Each step forward felt like crossing into a place that watched newcomers closely, deciding whether to accept or punish. The trees thinned, giving way to wide grassland broken by split rail fences, leaning tired and gray. A creek cut through the valley, its water dark and slow, whispering over stones that had heard too many secrets. The smoke they had seen rose from several points, now cook fires, chimneys, and one larger plume drifting from the far end near a cluster of buildings. She slowed her pace, eyes scanning the open ground. This place has seen trouble, she said quietly. Every place has, he replied. The difference is whether it remembers. They approached cautiously, staying near the tree line as long as they could. A pair of buzzards circled overhead, drawing wide, patient loops. Their shadows slid across the grass like warnings as they drew closer. Details sharpened the barn, with one wall burned black. A house patched with mismatched boards, windows shuttered tight despite the mild day. The marks of bullets scarred fence posts and door frames, old violence not recent but not forgotten. A man stepped out from behind the barn holding a rifle loose but ready. He spotted them and froze. Then another appeared near the house, followed by a woman who ushered two children behind her skirt. The mountain man lifted one hand slowly, palm open, in a gesture older than words. "We are just passing through," he called, his voice carrying. Steady across the open ground, the man with the rifle studied them, eyes narrow, measuring clothes, posture, weapons, or lack of them. After a long moment, he lowered the barrel a fraction. "Passing through has a habit of staying," he said. The woman beside the mountain man felt the weight of those words settle into her chest. She stepped forward despite the ache in her legs. "We only need water and a place to rest," she said. "We will move on before nightfall." The man exchanged a glance with the woman near the house, then nodded. "Once keep your hands where I can see them." They crossed the remaining distance slowly, every step watched. The closer they came, the more she noticed the tension in the air, like a storm that had not fully passed. Voices murmured from behind walls, eyes followed from cracks and shutters. Inside the settlement, time felt stalled like a clock that refused to move. A wagon lay overturned near the barn, its wheel shattered. The earth around it was dark and trampled. "What happened here?" she asked softly. "Trouble," the rifleman answered. "Men came looking for cattle, then for women, then for blood. They took some and left the rest of us to remember," the mountain man said. Nothing but his jaw tightened. His gaze swept the perimeter, noting blind spots, cover angles, places an attack might come from. The habit of survival did not fade easily. They were led to the house, offered water, bread, and a corner to sit. The woman drank, slowly savoring each swallow like a gift she could feel. Eyes on her hands, her scars, her clothes, the marks of someone who had seen the edge and come back. As the afternoon wore on, more people emerged, cautious, curious, children peeking from behind barrels, elders watching from doorways with the look of those who had buried too many. A gray-haired man approached, leaning on a cane. He studied the mountain man with sharp, knowing eyes. "You carry the look of someone who has lived where the law does not reach." The mountain man met his gaze evenly. "The law rarely reaches where it is most needed." The old man nodded once, as if that answer satisfied him. "We have had riders circling the valley for days," he said. "They watch, they wait. We fear they will return tonight." A murmur rippled through the gathered people. The woman felt her stomach tighten. "You should leave before dark," the old man continued. "We do not need more blood on this ground." The mountain man looked at the woman, then back at the old man. "If they return," he said, "they will not care who is passing through." Silence followed, heavy and thick. The woman stood despite her exhaustion. "If they come," she said, "we help each other. That is how people survive." Some faces hardened, others softened. Hope and fear wrestling openly. The old man studied her, then let out a slow breath. "We will not turn away. Help," he said at last. The rest of the day passed in uneasy preparation. Windows were barred, weapons checked, fires doused. The mountain man walked the perimeter with two younger men, showing them how to set up watches, where to stand, how to listen rather than look. As dusk settled, the sky burned red and gold, then faded to bruised purple. The wind shifted, carrying distant hoofbeats, faint but unmistakable. "They are coming," someone whispered. The valley held its breath. The riders emerged from the western rise, 6 of them, dark shapes against the dying light, moving slow, confident. They stopped just out of rifle range, sitting tall in their saddles. A voice carried across the field, smooth and mocking. "We know you have supplies. We know you have women. We will take what is owed." The mountain man stepped forward into the open before anyone could stop him. His voice cut through the tension, sharp and clear. "You have already taken enough." Laughter answered him, harsh and cruel. A leader rode forward, a few paces, eyeing him with interest. "And who are you to say what is?" "Enough, someone who has buried men like you," he replied. The standoff stretched, long seconds ticking by like heartbeats. The woman stood behind him, heart hammering yet steady. She realized then that this was another edge, another canyon, not of stone but of choice. A shot rang out, not from the settlement, but from the riders, a warning that tore through the silence, splintering a fence post. Chaos followed. The valley erupted with shouts, gunfire, horses screaming. Dust filled the air, thick and choking. The mountain man moved like he belonged to the violence, ducking, rolling, firing only when necessary. He did not waste motion or breath. The woman stayed low, reloading, handing rifles to shaking hands, urging, children toward the cellar. Her fear sharpened her focus rather than breaking it. A rider fell near the creek, his horse bolting wild. Another screamed, clutching his side, tumbling from the saddle. The attackers had not expected. Resistance that bit back minutes felt like hours. Smoke-burned eyes, ears rang. The ground shook beneath pounding hooves. Then, as suddenly as it began, the riders pulled back, dragging their wounded, retreating into the dark, leaving the valley battered but standing. Silence returned, broken only by sobs and the low moan of the injured. The mountain man stood in the open chest, heaving a thin line of blood at his temple. He wiped it away, eyes scanning until he found her. She met his gaze, nodding once they had chosen again not to walk away. As night deepened, fires were lit cautiously, wounds tended, dead counted. The cost was not small, but the valley still breathed. The old man approached, resting a hand on the mountain man's shoulder. "You have bought us time," he said. "More than we hoped for. Time is all anyone ever gets," he answered. Later, when the moon rose pale and watchful, the woman sat beside him near the dying fire. The valley lay quiet around them, scars fresh, but spirit unbroken. "This place will change," she said. "Everything does," he replied. "But not always for the worse." She looked at him, seeing now not just the man of the mountains, but someone who stood when others hid, someone who crossed edges and stayed. The Old West tested people in fire and fear. It asked who they would be when walking away was easiest. That night in the valley that remembered blood, two lives stood, rooted not by chance but by choice, ready for whatever dawn would bring. Dawn came slow and pale, rising over the valley like a careful promise. The night had not taken everything, and that alone felt like mercy. Smoke lifted from cold fires, drifting upward, thin and gray, as if the land itself exhaled after holding its breath too long. People moved quietly, now voices, low footsteps, soft on scarred earth. Children clung to mothers, men checked the perimeter again and again, unable to trust the silence. The woman stood near the creek, washing dried blood from her hands. The water ran dark for a moment, then cleared, carrying the memory away downstream. She watched it go, knowing some things never truly washed clean, but still needed tending. Behind her, the mountain man worked beside the others, repairing what could be repaired. His movements were slower, now pain stiffening his joints, yet his focus never wavered. He had slept little, watching the horizon until the stars faded, unwilling to be caught unaware again. When their eyes met across the clearing, something unspoken passed between them, recognition, understanding, a shared weight, carried since the canyon and now deepened by the valley. The old man called the people together near the barn where sunlight spilled across broken boards. He spoke of standing, ground, of choosing not to scatter like leaves before riders, of finding strength not in walls but in will. Heads nodded, some hands clenched, others trembled, yet no one turned away. "We cannot promise safety," he said, "but we can promise that this place will not kneel again." A murmur rose, agreement edged with fear and hope intertwined. Later, as the settlement stirred to life, repairs began. A fence post lifted a door. Rehung grain counted and shared. The woman found herself drawn into the rhythm, helping where she could, binding wounds, cooking what little remained. Her body ached, yet her spirit felt steadier than it had in years. The mountain man approached her as she knelt beside a child whose arm bore a shallow cut. He handed her a strip of clean cloth. Their fingers brushed briefly and neither pulled away. "You could stay," he said quietly. When the child ran off, she looked around the valley at the people moving with purpose, at the scars and the resolve beneath them. "I know," she replied. He waited, sensing more. "But staying means belonging," she continued, "and belonging means risking loss again." He nodded slowly. The West always demands payment. They walked together toward the edge of the settlement where the land opened, wide grass rippled under the morning breeze, the distant hills rolling like memory itself. He stopped there, looking back at the valley, then at the wild beyond. "I have lived too long without roots," he said, "and too long without people who would notice if I was gone." She felt the truth of it settle heavy and warm in her chest. Out there alone, survival had been everything. Here survival asked to be shared. "If you leave," she said, "I will walk with you. If you stay, I will try to build something again." The choice hovered between them, not dramatic, not loud, but vast in its quietness. The same kind of choice the canyon had demanded, the same kind the riders had tested. He closed his eyes, briefly listening to the land, the distant creek, the sound of hammers' voices. Life, he saw himself years from now, still alone, still watching from ridges, while others lived below. When he opened his eyes, the decision was there, clear and steady. "I will stay," he said. Her breath caught, not in surprise, but in relief. Like a knot loosening after years of being pulled tight, they returned to the others, and word spread quickly. Some greeted the news with smiles, others with cautious nods. The old man clasped the mountain man's forearm, gratitude plain in his eyes. As days passed, riders did not return. Perhaps they licked wounds, perhaps they sought easier prey. The valley used the time wisely. Watches were set, alliances formed, plans laid, not grand, not heroic, but practical and necessary. The woman took a small room in the house near the creek. Its walls were thin, the floor uneven, but it was hers. She patched what she could, planting herbs near the door, letting the act of tending ground her again. The mountain man built no house at first. He slept near the barn or under open sky, saying walls took getting used to. Yet each night he stayed, and each morning he rose with the others, no longer a shadow passing through. One evening, as the sun dipped low, painting the valley in gold, they stood together watching children chase each other through tall grass. Laughter rang out sharp and bright. She thought of her own children far away and felt the familiar ache, yet it did not crush her as before. It rested beside hope rather than smothering it. "Do you regret it?" she asked him quietly. He considered the question honestly. "No," he said, "regret lives in what we refuse to face." She smiled then, not small or cautious, but open. Seasons began to turn. The valley greened, then dried, then greened again. Crops took root, fences stood straighter, trust grew slowly, like anything worth having. The canyon remained far away, but never forgotten. Sometimes at night she dreamed of falling, of hanging between sky and grave. Only now the dream ended differently, with hands meeting, with ground beneath her, with a choice made rather than delayed. He dreamed too of the moment he leaned over the edge of the world and did not turn back. He woke each time grateful for the weight of the present. One afternoon, months later, riders appeared again on the distant ridge, fewer this time, watching, measuring. The valley did not scatter or hide. Men and women stood together, rifles ready, calm, steady. The riders lingered, then turned away, seeking softer ground. The west had taken notice. At dusk, the woman and the mountain man walked to the edge of the fields where the land met the open. Wild stars began to emerge. One by one, quiet witnesses. "We were both suspended," once she said, "between what was and what might be." He nodded, "and the ground held because we chose it." They stood there as night settled, neither fully of the wild nor fully tamed, but something in between, something earned. The Old West did not offer happy endings, wrapped clean and easy. It offered moments where people chose to hold on rather than let go, to stay rather than disappear. In a valley that once remembered only blood, new stories took root, carried by those who refused to vanish. And long after the canyon forgot their names,